Nothing more simple, returned the Count. I had known the famous Vampa for more than 10 years. When he was quite a child, and only a shepherd, I gave him a few gold pieces for showing me my way, and he, in order to repay me, gave me a poniard, the hilt of which he had carved with his own hand, and which you may have seen in my collection of arms. In after years, whether he had forgotten this interchange of presents, which ought to have cemented our friendship, or whether he did not recollect me, he sought to take me. But, on the contrary, it was I who captured him and a dozen of his band. I might have handed him over to Roman justice, which is somewhat expeditious, and which would have been particularly so with him, but I did nothing of the sort. I suffered him and his band to depart. With the condition that they should sin no more, said Beauchamp, laughing. I see they kept their promise. No, monsieur, returned Monte Cristo, upon the simple condition that they should respect myself and my friends. Perhaps what I am about to say may seem strange to you, who are socialists, who vaunt humanity and your duty to your neighbor, but I never seek to protect a society which does not protect me, and which, I will even say, generally occupies itself about me only to injure me, and thus, by giving them a low place in my esteem, and preserving a neutrality toward them, it is society and my neighbor who are indebted to me. Bravo! Cried Chateau Renaud. You are the first man I met sufficiently courageous to preach egotism. Bravo, Count, bravo. It is frank, at least, said Morrel, but I am sure that the Count does not regret having once deviated from the principles he so boldly avowed. How have I deviated from those principles, monsieur? Asked Monte Cristo, who could not help looking at Morrel with so much intensity that for 2 or 3 times the young man had been unable to sustain that clear and piercing glance. Why, it seems to me, replied Morrel, that in delivering Monsieur de Morcerf, whom you did not know, you did good to your neighbor and to society, of which he is the brightest ornament, said Beauchamp, drinking off a glass of champagne. Okay, today's passage is a fun one, an interesting one, and one that I'm finding very hard to comment upon. This feels like it is deviating from pure philosophy and even ethics into more political stuff. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it is transcending politics and ethics into a philosophical debate. But what exactly is being counted for here? Dante, or should we call him Monte Cristo now, explains his relationship with Vampa and pretty much confirms everything Pastrini had said in Vampa's backstory. And Beauchamp basically having a witty bon mot saying that Dante sent Vampa off surely with a slap on the wrist saying, don't do it again. And Monte Cristo, if we're going to call him that, says, no, I don't care if he does it again or not. Just that he needs to respect me and he needs to respect my friends, which is an interesting admission to be so openly, I guess, I don't know that I would call it opportunistic necessarily, but as Chateau Renaud says it, egotistical. It's all about him, self-serving interests. He acknowledges the men in the room as socialists, which has a different connotation in mid-1800s France than it does today. But he espouses this philosophy here. I never seek to protect a society which does not protect me, and which, I will even say, generally occupies itself about me only to injure me. It's one of these interesting lines that, on the surface of it, has a sort of logic to it. And I don't even mean in terms of like, oh, that makes sense for his character, but you can mistake something that is being said without fully knowing the context or intentions behind it, right? If you, say, are from the working class and society is out to keep you down, I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about the class system in Europe, but let's just say, in theory, you know, there is a society, economy, culture, what have you, that is trying to keep you in your place, and that if you try to exceed your place in society, it will give you a harsh and sharp reminder where you are supposed to be. In theory, what Dante's saying here sounds good, but Dante is rich. He wants to do his own thing. He doesn't like to be interfered with. And so when he gives that important context where he says, this may seem strange to you who are socialists, you have you hold humanity and your neighbor deep in your heart. For me, I don't protect a world in which doesn't protect me. Coming from the ultra rich suddenly makes you cock an eyebrow a little bit, going, well, interesting. I will pull back from the brink on relaying this to the modern world we live in which billionaires and trillionaires are, well, you know. But can you imagine one of these rich tycoons publicly saying, I don't protect a society which does not protect me? That's pretty brazen. But then it brings it back around. Maximilian here, saying that he sees a little bit through Dante's persona, the many masks that Dante has put on. You know, he is Dante beneath the mask of Sinbad, beneath the mask of Monte Cristo, maybe more, right? And Maximilian can kind of just like cut through the BS and say, hey, I don't bet that you regret having deviated from the principles you've so boldly avowed. And Dante's like, what do you mean by that? And Maximilian is like, I'm wondering if in that moment Dante's looking at Maximilian. Dumas goes so far as to really emphasize the intense looks Dante is giving him. I'm wondering if Dante's wondering if he recognizes him as Sinbad, or the man who helped him and his father from ruin. But then Maximilian just goes on and says, well, the situation that was just relayed to us, you delivered Albert, who you didn't know, and therefore you're doing a good to your neighbor in society. I'm curious how Dante is going to absorb this intrusion on his philosophy, particularly because we're right here on the property of Fernand. I keep saying that. But I wonder, I mean, if we take this chapter just in a vacuum, this almost seems to be gearing up between Dante and Maximilian as opposed to Dante and Fernand or Mercedes. But at least Bouchon has a glass of champagne. I'm hoping they have a little bit more for breakfast than just that. At least like a parfait, you know, a smoothie bowl. Get something in there, a little granola, some yogurt and berries and nuts and stuff. I think that would pair well with the champagne. But you need something a little bit more substantial for breakfast. Actually, parfait sounds good any time of the day, and I might go make one right now. So, until tomorrow, when we cover more of Chapter 40. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.